morning students, welcome to offline classes for 10th standard. So we are discussing the chapter called how do organisms reproduce. In previous part 2 we have discussed about the modes of reproduction which takes place in single organisms. So there are different modes are there, that is we have discussed in detail in previous class, that is about fission, budding, regeneration, fragmentation, spore formation and vegetative propagation. All these we have discussed in previous classes. From today's class we are going to discuss about how sexual reproduction takes place in plants. Okay, we will go for the next topic, is about how sexual reproduction takes place in flowering plants. See here the reproduction major in plants, the major part of the plant body, see there are plants having different parts like root, stem, leaves, flower and fruit. So there are different parts are there in plant body. One of the major part of the plant body called flower, which is the major, plays very important role in the reproduction. So here, so that the flower is considered as a reproductive part of a plant body. Why? Because the flower which contain all the structures which is responsible for reproduction. What are those? The stem and hand pistil are the reproductive parts of the flower. Here the stem, the flower which contain what? Stamen and the pistil. Whereas stamen is called male reproductive part and whereas pistil is called female reproductive part. So before this entering into this topic of this reproduction, first we should know that sexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction means what? There are two parents or the two cells are involved in the production of what? A new organism or new individual. Here in plants, the stamen and pistil are the reproductive parts which are responsible for producing of what? A new individual. And stamen is the male reproductive part. It produces a pollen grains in the anther which contains the male germ cell or male gamete. So before the sexual reproduction is what? A fusion of male and female gamete is called a sexual reproduction. Another definition for the sexual reproduction is what? A fusion of male and the female gamete. In flower, the male gamete is what? The pollen grain. So where the pollen grains are present? In the anther of flower, anther of stamen. What is stamen? Stamen is the male reproductive part. Whereas even plant also contain, that is female reproductive part, that is called the pistil. The pistil, which is the female reproductive part, it produces ovules in the ovary which contains the female germ cell called female gamete. So here we see where is a pistil and where is a stamen. So here this is what called completes this structure what we call a stamen, and this part what we call anther, and this long tubeless structure what we call the filament. So in this part, this is called anther. In this anther, it contains what? The pollen grains. The pollen grains are nothing but called they are the male gametes. And this is the basal part what we call, this is from here to here, this is complete part what we call the pistil. The basal part of the pistil is nothing but called as what? Ovary. Inside the ovary, it contains what? Ovules. So oval is the female reproductive or female gamete, and this is called, this structure what we call stigma. This long tubeless structure what we call style. So this is the male reproductive part and the female reproductive part. These are present in the flower. In case the flower which contains both male reproductive part and the female reproductive part which are present in single flower, such kind of flower what we call bisexual flower. Bisexual flower means the flower if it contains both male reproductive part and as well as the female reproductive part, if it contains the single flower, such kind of flower what we call bisexual flower. If a flower contains either male reproductive part or female reproductive part, such kind of flower what we call unisexual flower. Uni means one, Bi means two. Bi means if they contain both male reproductive part and female reproductive part. Such kind of flower what we call bisexual flower. If a flower contains any one, either male reproductive part or the female reproductive part, such kind of flower what we call unisexual flower. Okay, so this is a typical structure of the flower. So you need to practice this diagram for 4 marks you are getting in examination. So this is a very important diagram you need to practice for exam point of view. The next about the pollination. So here these the anther which are present in the stamen of a male reproductive part, and whereas the ovals which are present in the basal part of the flower, so they both has to fuse. So here we have seen that. So this is the ovary and this is the anther. So anther, it contains what? Pollen grains. So these pollen grains are nothing but what? Male gametes. So here is the female gametes are present. These male gamete has to fuse with what? Female gametes. How it takes place? How these male gametes are going to fuse with the female gametes which are present in the basal part of the flower? How it is happens? This is happens by the process called what? Pollination. Then what is pollination? The transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is from of a flower is called what? Pollination. It takes place, and how these pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma? So there are by means of what? By wind, water, or by insects. So these with the help of wind or with the help of water or with the help of insects, so they will help to transfer water, the pollen grains from anther to stigma. From stigma it goes to water, ovary where it is contains what? Ovals, it fused with that. So here these wind, water and insect are also called as what? Agents of pollinations, because they help for the pollination, hence they are called agents of pollination. If the pollen grains are transferred from the another to the stigma of the same flower, it is called self-pollination. So basically the pollination has two types. One is self-pollination and another one is what? Cross-pollination. What is self-pollination and what is cross-pollination? If the pollen grains are transferred from anther to stigma of a same flower, it is in the same flower, such kind of pollination what we call self-pollination. If the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower, it is called what? Cross-pollination. So here we see that. So this is a one single flower. It contains both male reproductive part and female reproductive part. So it is a single flower. If it is transfer of pollen grains takes place in this flower, this is called what? Self-pollination. This is one flower. This is another flower. Transfer of pollen grains from this flower to the stigma of another flower, if it takes place, this is called what? Cross-pollination. So there are two kinds of pollinations are there. One is self, another one is what? Cross-pollination. So these pollination takes place with the help of water, insects, wind and water. So those are that these are called what? Agents of pollination. So next we go for fertilization. So here once after pollination what happens? During pollination what happens? Only the gametes get transferred, or the pollen gets transferred from anther to stigma. See, after that these gametes has to fuse. That is what pollen grains has to fuse with the oval. The fusion of these gametes is nothing but called what? Fertilization. So here you see that. So once after pollination what happens? The pollen grains stick here. Why it is stick here? Because the stigma has sticky nature. So because of this stigma having a sticky nature, this holds the pollen grains. Once the pollen grains stick here, it develops a long tube-like structure. That long tube-like structure what we call, which is developed from the pollen grains, such tube what we call a pollen tube. Through this pollen tube, the pollen grains travel along with this tube, and finally it will fuse with the egg cell which is present in the ovum. This fusion of male gamete and the female gamete is nothing but called as fertilization. After fertilization, what happens? After fusion of male and female gamete takes place, it forms what? A zygote. Okay. After fertilization, the zygote divides several times and forms what? The embryo, which then develops into what? Seed, and the ovary develops into what? Fruit. So this is how takes place in sexual reproduction in the plants. First in what? All this process takes place in the flower of a plant, because so that flower is called a reproductive part of a plant body, because it contains all the structures which are responsible for production of new individual. So this is how takes place in plant body, how sexual reproduction takes place in a plant body. Okay, the next class we discuss about how sexual reproduction takes place in a human being. Okay, thank you.